Ladies, you'll end up shopping for your guy's deodorant, right? So try Degree's Original Cool Rush. You see, last year, Degree changed the formula, and men were mad. One guy even started a petition. So Degree admitted they messed up and brought the Original Cool Rush scent back. It's clean, crisp, and actually smells like someone you want to cuddle. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So toss one in your cart and find out why it's the best-selling men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. 3 couples, 4 vacations, a lot to unpack. Watch The 4 Seasons, a new series starring comedy favorites Tina Fey, Steve Carell, Will Forte, Coleman Domingo, and more in a hilarious and heartfelt love letter to long-term relationships. Based on the original Alan Alda film. Watch The 4 Seasons, May 1st, only on Netflix.
Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic, famous foods from restaurants across the country. Anywhere, nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. Goldbelly ships Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garden's famous cakes. So, if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT. That's goldbelly.com, promo code GIFT.
Hello, mega orderers. We have for you a special Thursday bonus episode. I was interviewed by Andrew Keen for his new KeenOn America. It's a great daily podcast focusing on tech, regulation in the American tech industry, perspectives on lobbying and culture and the American experience. He wanted to debate with me if the American dream is dead and what I feel about having moved to Europe. And I thought that this would be particularly relevant to share with mega orderers at Disorder because, Alex and I talk a lot about what does she feel as a Brit in America, what do I feel as an American in Europe and in London in specific. But we haven't gotten to explore my contention that America pins you into a box politically. You have to buy in hook, line, and sinker. It's very difficult to be a anti-abortion Democrat or a free choice libertarian Republican who wants a small state but also thinks that we, shouldn't support Israel with weapons or whatever. And in Europe, you can have those views. It's not just that there's the Lib Dems as opposed to Labor, as opposed to the Conservatives. It's that the individual working in the think tank, working in the policy space is more a free actor, is less constrained by the ideological purity that is required in American loyalty testing, litmus testing, think tank institutions and donors and whatever. So I wanted to just discuss this with Andrew Keen, and we did. And now we're going to cut to that episode, which I hope that you enjoy.
Hello, everybody. Over the last few days, we've been focusing on the impressions of America, of Trump's America around the world. We had the Financial Times' controversial columnist, Simon Cooper, on the show, arguing that it's the end of the American dream. He had a piece in the FT this week arguing that it's time to move to Europe for Americans. Not everyone agrees. We had the London-based FT writer Jemima Kelly on the show recently, also suggesting that she hasn't quite given up on America. She is, of course, a Brit living in the UK and looking at America from London. My guest today, another old friend, is Jason Pack. He is the host of the excellent Disorder podcast. Jason's been on the show lots of times before. He's an observer of the world's early 21st century disorder, and he is an American living in London. So I'm thrilled that Jason is back on the show. Jason, did you have a chance to look at Simon Cooper's piece? Is it time for Americans to move to Europe? You've already moved.
Well, he's just popularizing what I've believed for 8 or 10 years already. So yeah, I looked at the piece. I really enjoyed your podcast with him. I don't think many Americans will move because most Americans are not particularly global in their outlook. And as disenchanted as they will be, their networks of family and of perspective are in America. Some elites in media and finance will move. But for me, I just found the aesthetics of America becoming distasteful when I worked in DC during the first Trump administration. And that's why I pursued a European citizenship.
It's interesting that you choose the word aesthetics. Two thoughts on that. Firstly, America has never been distinguished for its aesthetics. People never came to America for aesthetics. It's never been a particularly beautiful country, a very dynamic place, a very powerful place. So why did you choose that word aesthetics?
Because for most upper middle class Americans, life under Trump, particularly if they're white and heterosexual, will not change tremendously. But the aesthetics of working in the policy space or in the media will change. Having to deal with all the BS that we hear when we wake up and turn on the TV in the morning, having to interact with Republican nutcase friends who, for example, say, oh, the fat is being trimmed by the Doge, and don't worry about all those people who've been being laid off. The aesthetics of it are ugly and mean. And I have found among some Republican colleagues and friends of mine that they love the vileness of this dog-eat-dog aesthetic.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of putting it. And I understand exactly what you're saying. I'm less concerned. I mean, I'm talking to you as a Brit or half Brit from California. I'm less concerned with the aesthetics as with the reality. And my sense in some ways of what's happening is that the Trump people are obsessed with what you call aesthetics. They want to appear mean. I'm not actually sure that they're quite as mean as they'd like to think they are.
Oh, they're pretty mean. I mean, people are running around the NIH offices, according to colleagues of mine. And if you're out to the bathroom and your card is inserted in your computer, they go in, they steal the data from your computer, and they use your having left your card.
Actually, I take your point. What I meant more by that is that whereas most traditional authoritarian regimes hide their crimes against the weak, the poor, migrants, they deny wrongdoing. My sense of the Trump regime, or certainly a lot of the people involved in this Trump administration, is that they actually exaggerate it because it gives them pleasure and it somehow benefits their brand. I'm not convinced that they're quite as bad as they'd like to think they are.
Oh, I agree with that. They make Schadenfreude a principle. They want to showcase that they enjoy other people's pain. It's a bizarre psychological thing. Trump, for example, wanting to show his virility and his meanness, probably because he's an inner coward and he's not that virile. But we digress in terms of the aesthetics of the individual American wanting to leave. I experienced American government, like the State Department, and then the bureaucracy of the policy space, say think tanks, or even the government relations trade space, say working for oil companies and government relations, as already authoritarian and ass-kissing in America. And the aesthetics of those industries I have always preferred in Europe, and that's only diverging.
One of the things that always struck me about Washington, D.C., it was always uncomfortable as an imperial city. It always has been since the end of the Second World War, with America dominating the world as being one of two or perhaps the only superpower in the world. But Washington, D.C. seems to always have been uncomfortable wearing its imperial mantle, cloak, in comparison, I think, to cities like London or Paris. I wonder whether, I'm not sure how much time you've spent back in America since Trump came back to power. I wonder whether, in that sense, D.C. is trying to catch up with London and Paris.
I actually was giving a briefing in Congress to staffers of the House Foreign Affairs Committee only 3 weeks ago. And DC seemed post-apocalyptic to me. Many of my favorite restaurants were closing. There was traffic jams at bizarre hours of the day, which I think this is because the Trump people don't know how public transport works and they just ride their cars everywhere. So yes, it seemed very, very bizarre being back. And you were trying to gauge the interlocutor you were speaking to. Were they merely pretending to be on board with Trump stuff, but they actually secretly think it's ridiculous, or were they true believers? And you had to assess that before you would make your comments. So there is a slide to a kind of, again, neo-authoritarian aesthetic. In my conference, it became clear that the Republican congressional staffers thought that it was all junk and that Trump doesn't care about Libya and he doesn't understand these issues, but we needed to make lip service in how we expressed our recommendations. So fascinatingly, various speakers said, oh, there's a transactional win. There's a way that cheaper oil can be gotten here, or we could make this policy recommendation appeal to the transactional impulses of the administration, even though everyone knew that we were speaking in a Democrat echo chamber where the only Republicans present were anti-Trump Republicans anyway.
You describe DC as post-apocalyptic. What exactly then, Jason, is the apocalypse?
I don't think that the Trump people who are running the show understand how government works. And whether you're at state or the NIH or USAID, you're kind of under siege. And, you're just doing what you're supposed to do and going through the motions. I mean, there's so much of the zombie apocalypse going on. So maybe it's more zombie apocalypse than regular apocalypse, whereby the institutions are pretending to do their work, but they know that it doesn't accomplish anything. And the Trumpian appointees are kind of pretending to kind of cancel people on DAI, but the institutions are still continuing.
I'm going to vulgarize something you said earlier. You talked about Trump wanting to appear bigger than he actually is. Maybe we might call that small penis syndrome.
Yes.
Is that, and then that's my term, Jason, let's be clear, not yours. Maybe it's fair or not. He probably would deny it, but I don't think he'll come on this show. He's more than welcome. Is that also reflected in the people working for him? Is there a bit of a small penis syndrome going on with a lot of the Trump people? Are they small town boys coming to America, coming to DC and in all their ressentiment, trying to smash up the world that they always envied?
100%. If you look at the Tucker Carlson and the Pete Hegseth who went to Princeton 03, and obviously Tucker Carlson's WASPy elite background is well known, they wanted to make it conventionally and couldn't. Do you know what I mean? Hegseth didn't achieve the rank of lieutenant general or colonel or anything in the army. He didn't make it in finance, and Vance obviously had just a minor career in finance. They didn't make the big time except through their hate and resentment of the establishment that succeeded on merit. So, I mean, you could call that small penis syndrome. I think another thing to point out is that many of them have been selected because whether they've been accused of rape or financial crimes or just meanness, they owe the great leader their ability to be in that position. And if he would throw them overboard, they're entirely exposed. So the Kash Patels of the world and the Hegseths of the world serve at the mercy of the great leader, because if they were thrown to the wolves, they could be, devoured for their misdeeds. And I think that makes it a place where it's all about loyalty to the boss. But maybe we could pivot to the initial topic about how I think Europe is a place where you can reinvent yourself as an individual now, certainly in the political and ideology space. And America really hasn't been for much of my lifetime.
Yeah, it's interesting. And this is how actually our conversation, you're a much better podcast host than I am, Jason. You're reminding us of the real conversation rather than getting led down one Trumpian byway or another. I did a show recently on why I still believe in the American dream. I was interviewed by my friend David Maschiottra, another old friend of the show. And I suggested that I originally came to America to reinvent myself. And that's always been the platform with which Europeans have come to America. You're suggesting that perhaps the reverse is true now.
I really enjoyed that episode. I thought you were a great guest and he was a natural host. But I realized how it wasn't speaking to me. Many of my European friends who work in law, finance, tech, startup, they finish their degrees in Italy or in England and they move to America. And that's where they raise venture capital and they go on the exact success trajectory that you explained. And they fetishize, oh my God, when my green card is going to come through, I'm going to have this big party. That never resonated with me because America was never a land of opportunity for me. And it hit me in hearing your podcast that that's because what I've aspired to is to work in government/think tank or to be a professional expert. And if you don't ally yourself with one of the major political movements, you're always branded and you can never move ahead. I'll give a few examples if you're interested in the way that my trying to be in the center has meant that I could never find a place in America.
Absolutely. So you're suggesting that your quote unquote American dream could only be realized in Europe.
100%. So I moved to the Middle East to serve my country after the 9/11. If Gore had been elected president, I likely would have joined the Army or the Marines or something. But Bush was president, and I knew I needed to do this on my own. So, I lived in Beirut, then I went to Iraq.
Where did you graduate from, Jason?
I graduated from Williams in 2002, but I was changing my studies as soon as the 9/11 happened. I stopped my senior thesis in biology, and I pivoted to doing the Middle East. I thought the Middle East was going to be the next big thing. But I didn't realize that if you wanted to do it your own way, for example, living in Syria prior to working in government, then you couldn't get those security clearances. But in the UK, that's not really a problem. If you go to Leeds or Oxford and you got sent to study Arabic in Syria, you can work for the UK government, but not in America. If you went and did that your own way, your loyalties would be questioned. You wouldn't get your security clearance. I got an internship to work at the US Embassy in Muscat, where I fell afoul of my supervisors because I was someone who wanted to speak in Arabic with Omanis and, for example, go to hear prayers at the mosque and really be a part of the society. And I was told, don't do that. And I'm like, but aren't we here to understand about Oman? And they're like, no, it's really important to mostly socialize with people at the embassy. But my British colleagues, they were out there in Omani society. And they were, for example, really participating in stuff because the relationship between the Omanis and the Brits and the Americans is a happy one. That's just a small example, but I want to make the kind of further point, which is that if you want to get promoted in think tank world in America, it doesn't matter whether it's Cato or Heritage on the right or New America Foundation or Middle East Institute on the left. You have to buy in hook, line, and sinker to the party line of those institutions. And if that party line is DEI, as it was at the Middle East Institute when I was there, and you're a white heterosexual male, you're not going to get promoted. And if, for example, you want to then interact with some Zionist think tank like FDD, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, I was going to get a fellowship there for work that I had done about monitoring ISIS in Libya. And they had proposed a funding line for my project, which was just technically reading jihadi Facebook posts and monitoring them. And then they did some more research on me, ironically, after we had already signed the funds. And they said, oh, we're so sorry. We're going to have to pull back on this. We're going to have to pay you a kill fee. We're really, really sorry. And I came to understand why that was. And it was because I had advocated that the Iranians should be allowed to get the bomb so that they could have mutually assured destruction theory with Israel. Well,
but Jason, I take your point, but everyone has their own narrative when it comes to why their career didn't take off and how they.
No, but that doesn't happen in Europe. I'm making a contrast.
But let me just come back to my argument about America, which is it isn't necessarily as straightforward as perhaps it first seems. I think one of the reasons why America has always been a great place for reinvention is because of the absence of memory.
No, but what I'm saying is they Google you and spy on you, and if you're not within the ideological cadre, you cannot progress at these kind of institutions. Like try to be.
Okay, I take your point on that, but thinking more broadly, America is a place where you can. I've done so many different things in this country, from being a scholar, to being an internet entrepreneur, to being an expert on technology, to being a critic of technology, to being against podcasts, to being a podcaster. And you can get away, and I've failed in practically all of them, if not all of them. But the fact is that because people don't have memory, you can keep on doing different things. And people won't say, well, how can you get away with this? Last week you were doing X. My sense, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong about London or Europe, is there is much more memory. You can't get away with perpetual reinvention in Europe as you can in the US. And maybe that's because of the fact that in your language, living in Europe with its memory and respect for memory is more aesthetically pleasing. So I'm not suggesting this is as simple as it might appear.
I agree with that last point, but I think I'm trying to bring something else out. In spheres like tech or podcasting, there isn't credentialism in America. And therefore, if you're just good at it, you don't need the credentials and you can get going. And you and other Europeans who had great merit, as you do, have benefited from that. And in Europe, you might run up against credentialism, but you didn't work at the BBC, so you don't get the job. I'm making a different point about ideological purity within the very specific realms of, say, working for an American presidential candidate or briefing a policymaker or rising up at a think tank. I have briefed Labour MPs, Lib Dem MPs, and Tory MPs, and they don't ask my politics. I can go in there and get a meeting with Keir Starmer's people on Libya, and they don't care about the fact that I want him to do something slightly different and have criticized him and praised him at different times on my podcast. Try having an influence with some Trump people and then say, I really think that I can help you on this Libya policy, but I happen to run a fairly anti-Trump podcast. No, you just can't get the briefing because America is about ideological purity tests and getting your ticket punch in the government and think tank and experting professions. And therefore, it's not someplace you can reinvent yourself. If you're clearly a anti-Trump Republican McCainite, you can't all of a sudden become an AOC Democrat for the purpose of one meeting. But in Europe, you can, because you can be a Lib Dem like Liz Truss and then be a Tory prime minister. And no one cares what my position on these topics are when they ask me to brief Keir Starmer's people. And that's something that I find so fantastic about Europe.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you know this stuff better than I do. But isn't someone like Truss rooted in ideological purity?
Absolutely not. She was a Lib Dem when she was at Oxford.
Yeah, but that was a long time ago. I mean, I can reverse that, Jason, and say, well, when Trump was young, he ran around with Bill and Hillary Clinton. He went to their wedding. He funded them. He never was even a Republican until 2014 or 15. So, I mean, he's an example of the very ideological fluidity that you idealize in Europe.
I agree with your point. I think that he's an exception there, and he wouldn't have allowed it from his staffers. They now have essentially loyalty tested everything. It's not a place where if you're a Democrat with ideas that would benefit the Trumpian establishment, you can be heard. I'll give an example. I like the Abraham Accords, and I have a colleague who wants to help extend the Abraham Accords to Pakistan. She can only work with ideologically pure Republicans in the pitching of this idea. She can't work with someone like me because I don't have the ideological purity, even though this is a nonpartisan idea and it should be embraced if you can get the Trumpians to be interested in it. But that's not how America works, and it has not been. Reagan, of course, if you said that you like taxes, and I'm someone who likes taxes and I don't believe in the Laffer curve, and I think neoliberalism is a sham, you couldn't be on that economic team. So there are different ideological tests. Trump was never a politician, so it doesn't really he's not an expert like me in the expert class where we've been litmus tested our whole careers.
Interesting. Jason, yesterday I was talking to someone who was thinking of hiring me to do a speech in Europe to a business group. And we were discussing the kinds of speeches I could give. And one of the things I suggested was a defense of America, suggesting that we can believe in America and that everyone's wrong. And these people have hired me before. I've often made provocative counterintuitive arguments, there was a little bit of a silence, and they said, you can't make that speech in Europe. No one will take it seriously to a business community. What's generally, I mean, you travel a lot, you talk to lots of different people. Have people really given up on the promise of America, particularly within the establishment, the business establishment, the political establishment?
I don't know. I think that many Europeans still think that this is a passing phase. I will comment on the fact that I do not see anti-Americanism in my daily life as a result of Trump, the way that, for example, you do see anti-Semitism as a result of Netanyahu's policy. The individual Jew is tarred by horrible things happening in Gaza, but the individual American is not tarred by the deporting and illegal detentions and, sacking of people by Doge, because people in Poland or London or even the Middle East understand that you're likely to not be a Trump supporter, and they're not targeting you as an individual as a result of that. So I think they believe in the promise of America, and they still might like to move to America. But on an individual level, if you want to be a political animal inside the beast of campaigns, rising up to be a David Axelrod kind of figure, America has been a place of these litmus tests, whereas in Europe, I feel that there's tremendous fluidity, because in Italy, they have so and so many political parties. And in Germany, what's the distinction between the SPD at one moment and the CDU and the Greens? And there's a tradition of coalitions that allows the individual to reinvent himself. That's my argument.
One of the things that came up with Cooper, he's certainly no defender of Marine Le Pen or Meloni in Italy, but he suggested that the Trump people are far to the right of Le Pen and Meloni. Would you agree with that?
Sure, because they want to break down institutions, whereas Le Pen and Meloni simply want to conquer the institutions and use them. They're not full-blown disordering neopopulists, to use the language of my Disorder podcast. When Meloni is in power, she loves the Italian state and she wants it to function merely with her ideological slant. Whereas the Trumpians, they have a Bannonite wing. They don't simply want to have a MAGA agenda, but use the US government. No, they want to break the Department of Agriculture. They want to break the EPA. They simply want to destroy our institutions. And there's no European political party that wants that. Maybe on the fringe, like Reform, but Reform probably doesn't even want that.
But Jason, we've heard so much about how the Bannonites idealized Orban in Hungary. A lot of people believe that Project 2025 was cooked up in Budapest, trying to model America on Orban. Is there any truth to that? I mean, are the Trump people really re-exporting Orbanism back into the United States?
I think that there is some truth, but it can be overplayed. It can go back further to Berlusconi. It's the idea that a particularly charismatic political leader can come to dominate the media landscape by either having a state media channel in the Berlusconi sense, or cowing media coverage to make it more favorable, which is something that Orban has done geniusly, and then doling out contracts and using the state for patronage, say Orban's father's construction business and all those concrete soccer stadiums. There is an attempt potentially in Trump land to, through an ideological project, cow the media and the checks and balances and have a one-party state with state media. I think it's going to be difficult for them to achieve, but Tucker Carlson and others and Bannon seem to want that.
After the break, Andrew and I are back discussing what if the Pope was a mega orderer.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Halliday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Saturday. Saturday, bring it on.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Not everyone is careful with your personal information, which might explain why there's a victim of identity theft every 5 seconds in the U.S. Fortunately, there's LifeLock. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity. If your identity is stolen, a U.S.-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year by visiting lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
You were on Monocle recently talking about the Pope's death. J.D. Vance, of course, is someone who apparently had one of the last conversations with the Pope. Pope Francis wasn't particularly keen on him. Bannon and Vance are both outspoken Catholics. What's your take on this global religious movement on the part of right-wing Catholics? And how does it fit in not only to the death of Francis, but perhaps the new Pope?
It's a very interesting question. I'm not a right-wing Catholic, so I'm not really in a position.
I thought you were, Jason. That's why you always come on the show.
I think that they don't have the theological bona fides to say that what they call Catholicism is Catholicism, because obviously Jesus turned the other cheek, and Jesus didn't want to punish his enemies and make poor Black or Hispanic women suffer. But there is an interesting thing that has been going on since 1968, which is that there was a backlash against the student protests and free love and the condom and all the social changes that brought about. And Catholics have been at the forefront, particularly Catholic institutions, in saying this has gone too far and we need to use religion to retake our society. And if we don't, no one will have children and we will lose out. And the Muslims and Africans will rule the roost because they're having babies. And that right-wing Catholicism is caught up in the moral panic and culture wars since 1968. What I argued in the Monocle interview that you referenced from earlier today is something quite different, which is that the Catholic Church has a unique kind of authority, and that unique kind of authority can be used to stand up against Trump, Bannon, Orban, and other neopopulists in a way that, say, Mark Carney or Keir Starmer cannot. Because if Mark Carney and Keir Starmer say, you guys are not sufficiently correctly American and you're not following the American laws, blah, 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 the kind of Americans who support Trump are not convinced by that because they say, these are just, pinko Brits and Canadians. I don't even care about Mark Carney. But it's quite different if the next pontiff is someone who comes not only from the school of Francis, but maybe more so is a great communicator vested in the real doctrines of the church, the Lateran councils and Vatican II, and can say, actually, this given thing that Trump has just said is not in line with the principles of Jesus. It's not in line with what the Vatican has said about, for example, migration or social equity. And I find that is a unique opportunity because even the right-wing Catholics have to acknowledge the Pope and Christian doctrine and the ability of
the Catholic hierarchy to say, this is not in line with our teaching. So I think there's a very interesting opportunity right now.
Perhaps, so that brings to mind Stalin's supposedly famous remarks to Churchill at Potsdam when they were talking about the Pope. Stalin said to Churchill, the Pope, how many divisions does he have? In other words, it's all the ideology and morality, and ultimately it doesn't really count. It's the kind of thing that perhaps if some of the Trump people were as smart as Stalin, they might make the same remark.
Except that was a physical war, and the Pope didn't have divisions to sway the battles in World War II. But this is an ideological or an influence war. And the Pope, if you've just seen from media coverage over the last week, is someone who has tremendous media influence. And I do think that the new pontiff could, if he wanted to, stand up to the moral underpinnings of Trump and pull even the most right-wing Catholics away from a Trumpian analysis of what religion is supposed to be about. Because Jesus didn't say, punish your enemies, don't turn the other cheek, and own the libs. Jesus said something quite different than that. And it will be the opportunity of the new Catholic leader to point that out.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you've seen the movie Conclave, which was very prescient, made by my dear London friend, or at least they're produced by Tessa Ross at House Productions. But I wonder in these new conversations whether in the debates about who should the new Pope be, they'll mull over TikTok presence.
I hope they will. And I want to point out something that many people probably are not aware, which is that the College of Cardinals that constitutes the conclave does not have to pick one of their member to be Pope. For the last 6 centuries, they have always chosen one of their own number, but they don't have to. So they could choose someone who has not only an ability to make great TikToks, but someone who can put forth a vision about climate change, about tax equity, for example, maybe about AI and what constitutes humanity from within the Catholic tradition, but reaching new faithful. And I think that they might actually consider doing this because in places like Western Europe, attendance is down, but in Eastern Europe and Latin America, it isn't. And in Africa, it's surging. So they may want to reach new millennials and Gen Z with a new message, but one which is rooted in their tradition. And I think that that would be a great counterbalance to what Trump and his ilk have done to how media coverage plays things like climate change and migrants these days.
Speaking of Trump and his ilk, Jason, lots of conversations here about the first cracks in his monolith. Speaking to me from London, I always look at the front page of the Telegraph, a conservative English newspaper. I refuse to give them money, so I never actually read any of the pieces. But I'm always curious as to the traditional conservative media attitude to Trump. What do, not so much the Conservative Party, which seems to be in crisis in the UK, but what does conservative media, conservative thinkers, what's their take currently on Trump? Are you seeing a crack? Are people seeing this guy's absolutely insane and that the tariff policy is going to make all of us, everybody in the world, poorer?
Well, Trump has always been a vote loser in the UK, so that even though Farage brags about his relationship, it isn't something that gets him more votes for reform. And whether it's Sunak or Badenoch, and Badenoch is the current leader of the Tory party, which is in opposition, she can't so closely associate herself with Trump because he's not popular in even right-wing British circles. However, the Tory media, like the Telegraph and the Spectator, they love the idea that he's owning the libs. We talked about Schadenfreude. We talked about attacking the woke. The Spectator has taken a very anti-woke turn over the last 5 to 10 years. And they love the idea of pointing out the hypocrisies of the left and the effeminacy of it and all of that. And that gets them more clicks. So from a media perspective, there is a way in which the Murdoch media is always going to love the clickbait, New York Post bait of the Trump presidency. And that applies very much, with the Sun and the Daily Mail and the way that they cover media in this country.
Although I was found in the US that perhaps the newspaper that has been most persistently and usefully critical of Trump is the Wall Street Journal, which is owned by Murdoch.
Yeah, but that's a very highbrow paper. And I think that it's been very critical of the tariff policy, and it said a lot of intelligent things about Trump's early missteps. But it doesn't reach the same people as the New York Post or the Daily Mail do.
What about the China issue? How structural is the tariff, the tariff crisis, if that's the right word, going to change U.S. relations with China? Is this the new Cold War, Jason?
I'm not an economist, but from what I've been told by the economists I've interviewed on my podcast, it's absolutely, completely game-changing, because whether it's a Apple iPhone or, most pieces of manufactured kit that you purchase or inputs into American manufacturing, it's assembled everywhere. And the connections between China and America are essential to make the global economy work. And it's not like you can all of a sudden move those supply chains. So this trade war is really a 1930s style beggar thy neighbor approach to things. And that led to and deepened the Great Depression, right? So I am very worried. I had the sense that Trump might back off because he does seem to be very sensitive to the markets. But maybe this is such an ideological project. And, Andrew Ross Sorkin on CNBC was just saying, even though he's willing to back off if the T-bill rate changes, he thinks that his strategy is working and that he's going to get some deals. And that terrifies me, because that's not what's happening. It isn't working. And God forbid that they'll push this to its logical conclusion and cause a new recession or depression.
If this continues, what indeed, you're happy in London, so it doesn't sound like you're coming back, whatever. But what will America become if indeed all these traditional allies, the UK, France, Germany, become, if not enemies, certainly just transactional relationships? What becomes of America without allies?
Wow, great question. I'm going to treat this in two parts: the American cultural component and then the structural geopolitical component. I'm a proud American. Culturally, I work on Sundays. I don't take any holiday. I get angry at contractors who are not direct. I am going to be American my whole life, and I want an American style work ethic, and I want things to function and the customer to always be right. So I didn't move to Europe to get European stuff in that way. And I think America will still be great at new inventions and at hard work and at all of that stuff. And the NFL will still be a much better run sports league than European sports leagues. Americans are great at certain things. The problem is, what if America's role in the world as having the reserve currency, coordinating the NATO allies, if that's eviscerated, we're just going to be living more and more in the global enduring disorder, as Corey Shaki points out, which is that the Europeans don't know how to lead. They can't step up because they don't have one prima inter pares. And since the decline of the British Empire, the British haven't learned how, for example, to coordinate the Europeans for the defense of Ukraine or for making new missile technologies or dealing with the defense industry. So we're just dealing with a rudderless world. And that's very worrying, because there could be major conflict. And then I just have to hope that a new American administration, it could be a Republican one, but I think it just can't be a Trumpian one, will go back to its old role of leadership. I haven't lost hope in America. I've just lost hope in this current administration.
Okay, mega orderers, you have heard me as a guest on Andrew Keen's KeenOn America. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to be going on KeenOn every few months these days, and I'll try to turn them into disorder episodes, because I think that he's a great interviewer. He has a natural voice. He does transitions so smoothly. And I invite you to check out his show. The link is in the show notes. As always, our producer has been the one, the only, the George McDonagh. Our executive producer is Neil Fearn. And we still wish you an orderly week, whether you are an American trying to flee America to live in Europe, or whether you are suffering under the yoke of Tarifistan. But the people we wish the orderliest week to are our Canadian friends. Oh, Canada, the mega orderer's home and native land. Mega orderers. I need many podcasts these days, not just to hear the rapid fire news, but to break down how could all this be happening to us. And someone I turn to is Jordan Harbinger. His show was previously named one of Apple's best. We had him on episode 69, Life in North Korea, Kidnapping Stories, and Why Symbolism Matters with Dictators. And that pretty much tells you all you need to know about how the Jordan Harbinger show works. He has deep dive interviews dealing with things like psychology, self-help. He might talk to an FBI negotiator about trust. And he draws on some of our top table disorder guests like Anne Applebaum to think about why disorderers like Iran and Russia can work together. I'm sure you'll love it. So search The Jordan Harbinger Show wherever you get your podcasts.